Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome and thank you so much for coming to today's broadcast. I hope everyone's doing really well today. Today, Dan Colbert and Tim Clark from Teamstudio are presenting Understand the True Business Usage of Notes Applications with Usage Auditor. My name is Courtney. I'm the Marketing Manager at Teamstudio and will be your webinar host today. I'll be taking a few moments right now to cover some housekeeping items. Then I'll pass the presentation to Dan so we can dive into today's topic. So the housekeeping items. The attendee list is private. All attendees are muted during this session, so you can participate by typing your questions for Dan and Tim inside the questions section on your GoToWebinar window. We're doing Q&A at the end of the session, but you're welcome to ask your question as you think of it in the question section. I'll put a voice to it once Dan and Tim are finished presenting. If you're having trouble finding it, there's a screenshot image on the screen here that'll help you find that section. This session is being recorded, and the links for the recording and the slides will be sent to you in a follow-up email in a few days. As most of you know, Teamstudio provides Notes app development tools and services. We celebrated 20 years in business at IBM Connect in Orlando earlier this year. The Notes tools are a suite of tools for Notes developers and admins. They help with tasks such as source code control, performance, and troubleshooting. So I'd like to quickly point out a few upcoming events. We broadcast a free monthly webinar series with TLCC. Next Tuesday, we're presenting Getting Started with the OpenNTF Domino API. Jesse Gallagher and Paul Withers are the presenters. You can save your seat for this broadcast on Teamstudio's website. And then Icon US, formerly IMLUG, is presenting a virtual event on May 9th and 10th. It's free and you can register at imiconus.org. So we're all here today so we can get a better understanding of the usage of our Notes apps. To get us started, Dan, Tim, and I would like to get your feedback with a poll question. I'll launch it now. You should see the poll question on your screen in just a moment. Okay, so what do you currently do to track the usage of your Domino apps? Do you view user activity in Notes database properties, use activity trends? Do you poll end users? So maybe you send out an email asking for users for feedback. Do you use a third-party tool like Usage Auditor or something else? Or maybe you don't do anything. Maybe you currently don't track the usage. I'll give you just one more second to get those answers in. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So it looks like half of you, 50%, view user activity in Notes database properties. 8% poll end users, 8% use a third-party tool, and 33% currently don't track the usage. Okay, that's great. Let me get back to this. Okay, so thank you so much for your participation. It's really great to hear the audience and what you currently do. So that's all for me. Now I'd like to introduce Dan Colbert, VP of Sales and board member at Teamstudio. Dan's going to get us started with today's topic. So take it away, Dan. I'll pass the controls to you now.
Great, thank you, Courtney. Great. Okay, so Teamstudio Usage Auditor. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dan Colbert. Some of you, hopefully, I've worked with in the past or may have spoken to at the different events that we attend, and as an account manager and member of the sales team here at Teamstudio, going back 12 or 13 years now, I guess. So spring has sprung a little bit here. So greetings from sunny New England. We're in the Boston area, and we had a really nasty snowstorm on Monday to welcome in spring. And because I was thinking about the turning of the calendar and what good timing it was with Teamstudio Usage Auditor as a kind of a theme around cleaning up the environments. And you know, true to form, you know, I got out my snow shovel and welcomed that. But Teamstudio Usage Auditor we're really excited about. It was officially launched on February 1st of this year, but it has been part of our offering, or our suite of offerings here at Teamstudio going back to 2009. And then before that, even some of you kind of longtime customers might remember Usage Monitor, which was a server installation or server-based tool or offering that we had back in the mid-2000s, you know, which we then converted into a professional service, which was Teamstudio Usage Auditor. But it's something that it's something that we're very familiar with. It's a problem or a project that we've been talking to our customers about for a very long time, how to effectively track the usage of notes applications for various reasons. And we, as I said, we're excited that we released this as a downloadable, user-friendly software product over the past couple of months. So, well, why do we do that? Well, we spend a lot of our time, again, as hopefully the audience can attest, we spend a lot of our time reaching out and having meaningful conversations with our customers to understand, you know, what the current projects are, what tools could help them, what information do they need to achieve success in those projects, and getting reliable information about application usage has been a big part of that. We have been known and have really focused on being the leading software tools company in the Notes Domino environment, as Courtney mentioned, going back 20 years with Analyzer, Chow, Configurator, you know, our source code control systems around Build Manager. And so we felt like bringing this usage auditing technology into the software product family was really a good direction for us to go in. So we did that in January. Had an opportunity to talk to a few people about it at Connect in Orlando. And so what we're going to do, or what I'm going to outline, are just a few common customer scenarios that we see, and then sort of position the usage auditing or usage auditor statistics within the context of those projects, and sort of try to paint a picture, you know, for everyone on the call, where those statistics might help, and see if they might apply to some of the things that you're working on. But it does provide valuable data, whether or not you're modernizing, you're looking at potentially a platform migration, or day-to-day business as usual maintenance and troubleshooting. So the first scenario that we'll look at is a server consolidation. And these aren't in any, I guess, particular priority or ranked order, but I guess I would admit, while I was writing the slides, this was the first one that came to mind, because it comes up a lot. It always has. So customer example A, well, you've got a server consolidation. So what does that mean? Okay, well, we know that you're trying to take an inventory, but also the end goal is to try to reduce the amount of overhead, reduce the amount of servers, licensing costs, manpower, and also run the business a little bit more efficiently. So, any environment over time will need maintenance and cleanup. So server consolidation has always been something that our customers are talking about. And in order to do that, there's a few key pieces of information that if you knew the answers, and if you knew them reliably, they could save you a lot of time. So number one is determine what applications are not being used. So where can we be more efficient, and where can we gain some space and some room on those servers. Reduce the overhead, and also as we become more and more energy conscious and try to be more efficient, everyone does in and outside of the office with carbon footprints, and be conscious of the contribution that we're making, not only there, but the overhead in man hours and how we can manage our time. we want to be able to do that with a server consolidation. Platform change or modernization. So many times a precursor to one of these other common projects that I'll talk to on the next few examples is before we modernize or before we take a look at potentially, even if it's evolving in the IBM environment and ecosystem of technology, or if you are looking at a platform change, you do want to take a look at the inventory and do a consolidation of what you have to make sure anything that is coming into the next evolution of your environment is something that's valuable and it's something that's being used by your end users. Server consolidation projects also are contingent on the quality of the information and how valid it is. So when we look at activity, and many people responded on the poll there, looking at the activity logs and the notes activity and the database properties, what's server activity, replication, agent activity versus actual business usage. So we see that as a big criteria. And domino activity logging can be limited in the parameters when setting the date ranges on how much data can be saved and how long that data is saved before it's purged. So there are some things that we've expanded upon so that we can actually leverage a greater data set to look at trends. And also, it does take time to formulate that data into readable tables and formats so that you can draw some conclusions and easily answer your questions. And so that's part of the pain that we've tried to eliminate with Usage Auditor. The second scenario, I guess, that came to mind as I was putting these together is modernization. And we've talked to probably a lot of folks over the years with our unplugged environment, X controls. So we do work with a lot of customers on an application-specific basis with modernization. And with Usage Auditor, we're looking at modernization from more of a full environment or an environment context. What's driving modernization? Well, we know, well, I guess different things for different organizations, but we know there are a few different items. Dependency on the notes client. There are different devices that people are using to access applications. There is, again, an amount of overhead and work that's involved. And so we do hear that a lot. These applications are critical. They're really important. We want to continue working with them. But we're looking at our dependency on the notes client as maybe an area of better or more efficiency. Reducing the upgrade and troubleshooting efforts. So anytime there's an upgrade, the more cleaning that you can do, so to speak, or the more analysis that you can do to determine what's being used and what really needs to be upgraded, that can offer some efficiency. What else drives modernization? Well, improving the user experience. So, as the workforce kind of evolves a little bit, and again, expectations change from what an application user interface should look like and how it should behave and where it can be used. All those things affect and drive the need for modernization. And so part of one component of this project, or one key piece of data, is web access versus notes client activities. So that's something that we've built in and we've taken on board as a requirement from our customers. So web access versus notes client activity. How can you get, again, good, reliable, and easily accessible information in that area? And sort of moving forward beyond the planning for a modernization, but once you have modernized an application or even written a new application in X Pages, how is the adoption looking? So are people actually integrating that new app into their daily workflow and in their business usage? So we've understood from conversations with our customers that looking at trends and understanding how these numbers change over time and where they're going and trying to predict that would be helpful. So there's a trending component, and that's directly related to the adoption. So looking at notes client activity versus web access is something we found to be pretty valuable. Maintenance and support, another one. Again, you know, if you lived a day in the life of a Teamstudio account manager, these are the types of things that you would hear every day. You know, we're looking at modernizing. Well, you know, we're in maintenance mode right now. We're working on server consolidation. These are the things we hear. So in the world of maintenance mode or business as usual, as my colleague Tim likes to refer to it, that's something that is absolutely very common. And you know, on the surface, it's, well, there's not a lot going on. It's maintenance and support. Well, we all know day to day in that job there is a lot that goes into maintenance, support, and troubleshooting, because you're supporting business critical applications. So how could usage auditing or usage statistics help in that area? Well, I think a lot of this is how can we reduce the amount of tickets, reduce the amount of time we spend troubleshooting things that we really don't need to. So it's a cleanup approach, a cleanup strategy. So identifying, for example, one thing that we hear a lot are unused mail files. Who's accessing archived mail files? That's a common requirement. In day-to-day business usage, and in particular when there is any change or new versions of applications, human resource related changes, so changes in job role, title, structure, or turnover, usage auditing can be a very helpful tool to have and answer some questions around who's accessing secure applications or onboarding new staff. So if I know that someone is in a particular role and that's a defined role, I could actually look at Usage Auditor and get an understanding of what databases they need to effectively do their job, and then that can then help me make decisions about what apps need to stay on that production server and be supported going forward. Managing the notes client usage, again, somewhat related to the point I made on the last slide about web usage versus client usage. And application usage in terms of the servers. So one thing that we'll hear from notes admins is, you know, a question around who's accessing an application on a production server versus a replica server. And this is something that we're able to show, and Tim will get into in a little more technical detail from an admin's point of view. But you know, from a day-to-day application maintenance and support perspective, you know, we found that to be an ongoing pain point. And the last example that I'll go through is platform migration. So platform migration, you know, it is a common topic, and you know, it's something that, you know, at the different conferences that we sponsor and attend, and again, the conversations that we have, you know, as technology evolves, it is something that people do consider. And this is an area that has so many different aspects to it. And I don't really want to talk in a lot of detail around the platform migration projects as a whole, but really just think about, well, where does usage auditing fit in? And I think there's a very, very clear area, which is, okay, if we are going to take a look at a migration, what are the most widely used applications? So we've got an existing platform. We know we've been supporting the business with this for a long time, and we've got a lot of hard work invested into designing these applications to support those business processes in the best way possible. So which ones are being used, and how can we leverage that design and the thought that's been put into those as we go forward, and which ones can we clearly and confidently say are no longer accessed? And to take that a step further, which ones have no activity? So there's widely used, and then there's not very widely used, and this becomes a very complicated question for our customers to answer, because if it's used but not very much, but it's used in a very important way at a very important time of year, like auditing or tax season, or you know, a certain time that products are released, it could be not very widely used, but still very important. So there's a lot that goes into the usage, but one clear metric is we have applications with no activity at all. And so, you know, you hear the phrase low-hanging fruit and things like that, but there's some nice features right out of the box with usage auditing that don't need a lot of kind of input and analysis from your staff to determine the nature of the application. You can just look at it and say, no one ever uses this app. So that's something that comes up. And this was part of the poll, but relying on incomplete usage data. There are many people that I've talked to over the years, and when I ask them about how they gather usage statistics, many times the answer is, well, we send out an email to our end users and ask them, are you still using this database? And I almost knocked Tim Clark off his chair a couple of days ago when we talked about that, and because it kind of, I think he was kind of blown away. But when you think about it, it's not very scientific and it's not really effective, but it is something that it does make sense. Hey, let's ask people, just like we just ran a poll. So we ran a poll on this webinar, but let's put a poll out there and see who's using the databases. But as we all know, email responses and informal polls, they may give you a feel for the information, but they're not reliable to the point where you can make business decisions that have an impact. With that data, that's a little bit incomplete. So that's where we feel like usage auditor can add some value. And then another big question, and I guess I could have added on to this bullet point, how much money will it take? But that's a very difficult kind of question for us to take on, and for any company. But we can start to address the question that senior management and team members on the Notes Domino teams they're looking for, which was, well, how long will it take? And in order to get there, there's a lot of preliminary information that needs to be gathered, and we believe that it starts with understanding what you have, and then we can talk probably on another session about what we have and then how complex it is it in different platforms. So there's a lot that comes later, but one of the key pieces of information to gather on the front end is, well, what's the size of the application suite that we're talking about? And when you have some good reliable data about usage, it seems like that question's a little bit easier to at least start to answer. And Tim, Tim's going to jump into some of the details there. So that's customer example D, and that leads us into the demo, which I hope that was helpful. I know everybody wants to see the demo, and so I'm going to go ahead and transfer rights over to Tim. But hopefully that sets the stage with some familiar environments for some of the folks on the call. And
that was awesome information, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, and we are right on time. So Tim, for the next 20-25 minutes, is going to give you guys a demo.
Great. Thanks, Courtney.
Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. Should be a big grazed workspace at the moment.
Looks good, Tim.
Awesome. Good stuff. So I'm kind of with you guys that 50% of you use usage details. So I'm just going to show you a single reason why we don't use them for our usage auditor, and then we'll get into the main body of the demo. It kind of makes sense to do this here because so many of you are using user activity for usage auditing. So the reason that we don't use this particular view, so you come into your database properties, you come into the information tab and you click on user detail button, and what happens is it gives you this great fantastic view of stuff that if you were to copy this to the clipboard and try and use that somewhere else like Excel or something, it pastes into one single cell, and then you get the next row, and it's got, so this would be all in one single cell, and then this would be in one single cell, and this would be in one single cell. So it makes it really hard to parse that data out and make any use of it. Also, it doesn't give you any way of categorizing any of this stuff that you've got. All of this stuff over here is not marked out as to whether, I don't know, is GSX Monitor, I know what it is, a bunch of you guys will know what it is, but GSX Monitor, is that a user? Is that a tool? Is that a server? agent signer. Is that a signing ID? Well, clearly it is in our example, but is that a user, or it's logged in as that, or is that an agent using that to, an application trying to get in and use the database, and is that valid? The only other thing that, that's really hard to work out in all of this. The only other thing is you're reliant on this field here. For me, it's grayed out, this because I'm not a manager of this database. But down here, this record activity, if that's not ticked, you're not going to see any usage activity data at all for your application. And it's up to the manager of the database as to whether that gets turned on or not. Now, here's one I messed about with earlier on a call with a customer this morning. So we took a look at our own usage auditor database and the user details in there, and I thought I'd wiped this out, but that's fine, I haven't. I did it on the local one. So here's all my data. If I turn this off and click OK, all of that data is gone. I've got nothing to go on now. So if I go back to this, and I've done that by mistake, and turn it back on, none of that data is coming back. So all of my usage is now, well, how do I know what usage I've got? I don't. So that's one of the reasons why we chose, when we were developing this product, we chose not to use the user activity inside the database properties, because it's A, fraught with danger, which is one of my favorite sayings, and B, it's not reliable. So it can be turned off, it can be lost, it can be, just not available for you to use. So what we use instead is we use the one thing that nobody said that they use, which is activity tracking on the Domino server. So 0% of you said that you use activity trends. And I would, if you do nothing else out the back of this webinar, I'd recommend you investigate activity trends. We would love for you to turn it on and start using Usage Auditor against it, because it gives it to you in a much more usable way, but it's a lot more reliable for you to see the data, a lot more reliable way. Here is our Teamstudio version 5 Usage Auditor product, and you can see there's an awful lot of information here. We come into this databases by count view, and we start off by looking at activities. So an activity, when Domino is doing activity trends and activity logging, is all about those times when you see, if you've ever had a trouble sleeping and stared at your Domino server console, you've seen, people go past. It's like Tim Clark connected to the server, and then Tim Clark read so many documents and deleted so many and wrote so many, and then he's disconnected. That's classed as an activity to the Domino server, and that's what the Domino server records as an activity, and that's what we record in a Usage Auditor as being an activity. We don't go down to the level of how many documents you read and wrote and deleted, because when you're looking at usage, it actually becomes a lot less granular than that level of granular detail isn't really needed when you start looking at usage. What you want to know is there a level of activity on that database? Is it being used on a daily basis, and who's using it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip into one of these records. Let's look at the Usage Auditor database itself. You can see that we've got some summary data here on the view, and the eagle-eyed amongst you will have spotted that we've got some filters up here. So I can turn on mail, and I can also turn on the ignored databases. Now, we've set a whole bunch of databases to be ignored because we don't think that they're relevant. So for instance, we've turned off some of the templates, not all of them, but we've turned some of those off, and some of our customers' development data, we've turned some of those off as well, so that you don't see those. But we can ignore databases. You can ignore all your templates, your names.nsf, your log.nsf, if you're on the mail.box, for instance, if you're not interested in seeing the stats of those. If I turn on mail, you'll see here that we get a bunch more information. If I turn the applications off, you can see that we get just the mail files, and these are derived via the path that they're in. So it's a high-level way of determining what applications are what, to be honest. So let's jump into this one. This is the Usage Auditor record for this particular database on the server that I'm looking at it. So it's the usage record of this database. We've got the title here, path, server, and replica ID, so you can tell exactly which version of the database it is, or which replica it is based on the server. And then we've got some interesting stats down here. Okay, we've got the notes activity and web activity. So that's the users connecting into the database and doing stuff, whether they're connecting via a notes client, as would be notes activity, or whether they're connecting via a browser. And we don't care what platform that browser is on. It can be a desktop or a mobile, but it would come in as web activity. Then we total those two numbers together and give you a total user activity for that application. And then we start looking at agent activity. As Dan mentioned, lots of customers have told us that they don't need to know why agents are accessing their databases until we stumbled across one customer who told us a small horror story about their tax returns. And they were doing activity tracking based on the user activity from the database properties, and they hadn't figured that the agent signer ID was doing anything useful with the database. So they ignored that in the results, and they figured that after 9 months of tracking, there'd been actually no user activity inside that database. And they were actually 100% correct in their assumption. There had been no user activity inside that database. However, that database was used to store their tax return information, and about 6 to 9 weeks after they archived that database off of the server, the tax auditor came in and said, right, I'd like to look at this database like I do every year so I can prepare your accounts to do returns. And they went, oh, we archived that out. What they didn't realize was that agent that they ignored was actually putting data into that database on a daily basis. And then they had a real problem trying to do their tax returns with the auditor because they had to go back and work out where all that data had gone. They didn't even spot that the agent at the other end that was supposed to be putting data into that database was failing because it had no database to put it into. They didn't even catch that. So yeah, bless them, they had a world of problems. But that's why we record this. We also record server activity. So we record when servers talk to each other about this database and replicate it around, and we sort of track that because it may be that you're only responsible for one part of your environment and somebody else somewhere is actually using that database. Now, you won't see the activity on this server because nobody's actually opening the database on this server. However, it's replicating every day to another server, and unless you know that that's happening, then you won't know to go and look at that other server to see if there's any user records on there. So that's really quite important. Okay, now we start getting into some of the more abstract concepts that we've got inside of our usage auditor, and this one's really cool when you start looking at projects like consolidations or modernization, or even migrating it to somewhere else. This number that we're looking at here, this days used by users, is really important. So we started this particular data set in the middle of December, and we've been recording this data set on a daily basis from the middle of December all the way through to now, which is getting on for, early April. So what we want to know is, out of those days, those calendar days between the middle of December and now, how many of those have had users using the database? Now, I don't care on each day if it's 1 user or 1,000 users accessing this database. I just need to know that on any particular day, did a user touch this database? And that's what this count is here. So each calendar day that a user accesses, we tick up 1, we mark up 1 on this. So we do the same for agents and we do the same for servers. As you can see, this database is never replicated to another server. But agents have used this database on 21 days, and users have used this database on 70 days since the middle of December. Now, the really clever ones amongst you will have spotted that this total days used should be at least 70. As I said earlier, we started recording this data set in the middle of December, and we had some beta versions of it, and we've moved that data set along, and we've still got a beta issue in here that we're going to fix this week, hopefully. Or next week, sorry, now, where we correct this. But this should be at least 70, or it could be up to 91 if you were to add these two numbers together. So it could be a maximum of 91, it should be a minimum of 70. So we're going to fix that, but it works if you start a new data set, it's absolutely fine. Another great thing that everyone really likes when we show this to people is how many users, unique users, are using this database. It's all very well recording that there's this many user days and this much activity, but how many people are really using it? So we get down here into the list of 18 people that are actually using this, and you'll also see that there's one anonymous user there. So we do record the fact that anonymous, when you haven't signed into a web browser and you're accessing your database, we do record that there's been 9 web activities for anonymous for this database. So you can tell if there's people trying to access this database and causing you possibly a security breach, or any other scenario that might come around about the anonymous usage. We can also show here, which is something a customer this very morning asked me about, is can you tell me when a user last used a database? Well, yes, we can. Very simply, go find the database, find the user in the list, and then look at the date, because it will show you when they did last access the database. And also down here, some customers have found this invaluable for each database. We actually name the agent that's accessing the database. So if you've got 15 agents accessing a database and you see lots of activity for one and only a couple of activities for another, and it should be doing more than that, at least you'll know which one of the many agents that might be accessing your database are not using it enough. So you could go and find them based on their name. You could use some of our other products like Configurator to go search for that agent name and find the agent that's not using it and go fix that. So those are the records that we keep on a per database level, and you'll see that we can sort any one of these columns in which way you want. A view that's even more popular than that one is this one. This is the last user date. So if you're doing consolidation, maintenance and support, platform migration, or even modernization, I'd recommend this view as being really important to you. This is the one that lots of people will want. This is the one that shows you if a user has ever touched this database. Actually, this particular category will show you if a user has never touched your database since you started recording. So since this middle of December for our data set here, you can see that no user days have been recorded for any of these databases. There is notes activity, but that's due to the servers doing replication. So over here, we'll see that we've got some databases and we've got templates and all sorts of stuff, but none of these have ever been touched by a user. And you wouldn't expect the templates to be touched by users, so that's absolutely normal. But some of these databases where we look at this one here, home and user profiles, nobody's used those. Well, maybe we can archive them. Okay, clearly you would want to check with the owner of the application first before you do, but at least it gives you a hit list of stuff to go and check. Also, we find this view really popular. The databases with size. So it shows you how many databases with no activity and what their size is. So how much space you might be able to save in your backups or in your archive routines, and therefore you can work out how much time you might be able to save. If you're really crunched on how long it takes you to back up your data set, maybe removing or archiving some of those databases could save you some of that time. Okay, this is getting into trimming down your data set now. So if you're gonna do maintenance and support, for instance, if you're in that mode, then actually working out who are the business users and who are the devs and admins is really important for you. So you don't want to record usage data for a developer who's accessing your I'm going to say this and regret it straight away. You don't want to record user activity for a developer who's accessing your production database. Well, Teamstudio being the development-centric organization that we are, we don't really recommend developers access your production databases. We recommend that they do that in development, and then you promote them into test and then production. But if you do have that, you might not want to record that because you might not want to show that users and admins are actually accessing the databases or have that activity recorded as business use. So if you don't want that recorded, you can come into the ID file or the ID record for that person, and you can disable the database tracking over here with this button. And that means that nothing for that user will be recorded across the whole environment. So you can take them out of being a business user. And similarly, over here, if we go back to by accounts, if I didn't, for instance, want the catalog to be recorded, or the stats for that, I could go and do actions, mark selected as ignore, and then that database would remove itself from here, and we wouldn't see the stats for that either, because that's not a business app. Maybe I should have picked on a template for that, but you get the idea that you can actually make the data set just the business applications and just the business users. Okay, come down here to trending, and we also, because we've got a big data set now from the middle of December, we actually want to start doing some analysis on it inside the Notes client. So what you'll see is that we can do, this is the analysis that ran on the 1st of February, and we can see that this website database has actually been used a total number of times, 29,000 user activities, 0 agent and 0 server. If we look at that in March, website is showing as 5,856 total user activity. So that's a big difference. And we can start to trend these out. And then if we ignore the 3 mailed up boxes at the top there, you'll see that website again is the biggest used database, 33,242 user activities. So it's gone way back up again. So we can start to build trends based on that, but it's easier to see in this application view. So here's that application website, and you can see here that the client total, which is the user activity, 15,000, 4,000, 18,000. So you can see that there's been a dip in the usage in the February data. Now I say February data and we're looking at March. Well, that's because this trend analysis ran on the 1st of February. So this is looking at all of the data previous to the date it ran. So all the way from the middle of December, all the way up to the end of January. So that would be December, January's data. This data here would be the February data because it ran in March. And likewise, this would be the March data because this ran on the 1st of April. So hopefully that's clear for everyone. And then the last thing I want to show you really before we end this demo and start taking some questions is that we can run across platforms. So the beauty of this system is that you can actually go across server platforms, doesn't matter what operating system they are. So if you're in the middle of mergers and acquisitions and you start acquiring databases and you want to know who's using them and stuff, you can use this tool. It doesn't matter, there's nothing to install on a server. The only thing that we install is a small exe file on the Notes client where you install the product, and that allows you to then reach out to all of the different servers that you configure here. You can see here that our 3 servers are in 3 different certification hierarchies. So we've cross-certified one ID to access all of these 3 different servers. And in fact, they are entirely 3 different Domino domains. So they all share nothing in terms of an address book. So they have their own address books and their own users and their own security and hierarchy and everything, and yet we can still gather all of their data into one place to do trend analysis across our total estate. Our agent settings, because this runs on a Notes client, we need to tell it when to run. So we have this here, we have 3 o'clock as our time that this is going to run. And then we have, here's our trend analysis, just to show you, we have it running on day 1 of the month and it runs at 4 AM. So we do a scan and then we do a trend analysis, excuse me, on the 1st of every month. And that leads me back to the beginning. You can see that we've got a bunch of data here. We're pulling it in from different servers, from different certification hierarchies. We've got the cross-certification set up, and we're just showing, you know, the stuff that we need to see based on the fact that we can get to all of this data and we can use it all in one place. If you were to try and do this yourself, it would take you hours and hours and hours to scan through every single database on every single server and pull all of that information back in. You could write agents to go gather that, but like I said, the user activity in the Notes database properties isn't always reliable and can be turned off and lost. So for those of you who don't track usage currently, I'd recommend it's something that you do. For those of you who, you know, poll your users, I'd recommend that you continue doing that because it's good to know who the business user is. But if you can put some, as I call it, empirical evidence, data-based evidence in front of the business owner of that application, at least they'll have what the users think and what the system thinks is the usage. And then for those of you who use the notes activity, fine. If that works for you, that's great. We don't believe that's a reliable way of doing it, and we think we've got a much better solution here for you. So, Courtney, I guess that's back to you.
Thanks, Tim. That's awesome. And thank you, Dan, for the excellent information. It's really great to hear real examples of how customers have used Usage Auditor and to see it in action. So I am going to share a slide right now. Just to remind everyone how to enter in your questions. So if you've been saving a question, feel free to type it into the question section on your GoToWebinar control panel now. You can get there on your control panel, just type it in this area here, and I will put a voice to it, and then Tim and Dan will answer verbally. All right, so Q&A. First up, we have a question from Anne. This came up when Tim was talking about how the tool pulls information, and so you may have answered this indirectly, I'm not sure, but you say you get information from the logs. In her case, they only keep 7 days of information in the logs. So if they installed Usage Auditor, would they then only get 7 days of information initially?
So to answer that, it depends when you turn on activity tracking. So the activity tracking, it puts stuff into the log files. So if you've been recording that already, when we start Usage Auditor and you run it for the first time, it will pull all of those 7 days that you've already got inside your log file. If you install Usage Auditor and go through the install routine and turn on activity tracking at that point, the first time you'll get usable data will be tomorrow, and it will only be tomorrow's data. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, so kind of as a follow-on question, Chinmaya is asking, if we switch it on today, is it going to record data from today or from old?
So we'll only get data from today. We're not clairvoyant. I'm afraid we can't see into the past.
Makes sense. Okay. So another question, how is Usage Auditor licensed?
I guess that's one for Dan, actually.
Sure. Thank you. So the licensing is, it's a great question, and it's something that we put a great deal of thought into before launching the product. So a couple of key points that I would make on the licensing. So it's installed on a client, which you've already expressed, Tim, but it's licensed based on the number of servers that you choose to track with the environment. Okay, so it's licensed on a per server basis. There is no there's no licensing policy that says you have to run it on every server. So you could choose a specific number of servers to track, or you could pilot it on a smaller group of servers. And the other thing that I would highlight is that there's no limitation on the number of databases. And so that was kind of the big question we had internally, determining how to license this properly and in a customer-friendly way. And the feedback that we got from everyone that was a simple format where we just track the number of servers that are going to be where the usage auditing data will be collected, and we charge based on the number of servers that you have. The entry point for the solution is $2,500 US.
All right, great, Dan. Thank you.
Yep.
We have another question. This is back to Tim. So can you remove templates or admin DBs from activity?
Yes, absolutely. What you can do is you can select the admin DBs that you don't want to track, and you can do the action that I think I showed in the demo that says remove selected or mark selected as ignore, and that will then remove them from the tracking.
Awesome. Okay, next up. So Helmut from Germany is asking, can you run more than one instance of Usage Auditor in different regions of the world at different times?
Absolutely. Actually, I'd say that's probably a preferred solution if you're going to be doing this in a global manner, because the notes client that you install it on will be busy collecting that data, and you'd want to make sure that you're tuning it to the right time of day for those servers so that they're not busy dealing with users and they can actually serve this data to the usage auditor client.
Okay, so that makes sense. So the tool runs in which time zone? Is it the local time zone for the server?
It's the local time zone for the client that's running the collection of the data from the log file. So if, in our example, for instance, we've got our client is running in the Boston office, so all of the times, like 3 a.m. is 3 a.m. Eastern time, or whatever the time zone of that machine is set to, which is Eastern time. So that's when it runs for us, 3 a.m. Eastern. So for me here in the UK, for instance, if it was accessing my server, that would be 3 a.m. plus 5, so that would be 8 a.m. in the morning. So if that was later or across in Central Europe, that would be 9 a.m. So that would be a really bad idea for us to be accessing the server and pulling a bunch of stuff out of the log file at 9 a.m. when everyone's turning up for work and trying to log on. So we might shift that time or set up a local usage auditor or even just a different database on the server and have that agent run at a separate time. So depends how you want to do it and how many notes clients you can dedicate to usage auditor. But you will need at least one.
Okay. In Usage Auditor activity, how are the users listed? Is it by last access date?
In the database count, so when you look at the database record itself, it's listed by alphabetically, actually, I believe. Or is it counts? No, it's listed by counts. He says looking at one of the records. Yeah, so it's listed by counts based on notes client activity first and then web activity.
Okay, so that's a good feature. If somebody has a huge list of users, it'll be easy to find a particular user.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so it looks like we have one last question. Does Usage Auditor need to run on a client or can we run it on a server?
Okay, so we get this question pretty much every time we do a demo with a customer. It's like, can we run this on a server? There's two answers. The short answer is we don't support you running it on a server, and there's a good technical reason for that. Because there's a C API code piece behind this that you need to install. It's an exe file. So we compile that once for the Windows platform when we've tested it against the Notes client APIs, so that we know it works against the Notes client APIs and we know it works on a Windows client platform. Because Domino servers come in so many different flavors and you can install it on so many different platforms, which is a great thing about a Domino server, and we love that. It also means that if we wanted to make this a Domino plugin, it would be really difficult for us to develop that cost effectively and keep the price point as low as it is. So we don't develop it for Solaris and Linux and iSeries and Windows and AIX. We just develop that for Windows. So the answer is yes, you do need to run it on a client because that's the way that we support it.
Great. Okay, so those are all the questions we had queued up in the questions panel. I want to invite you that if you think of another question after we end this broadcast, feel free to reach out to your Teamstudio account representative, or you can contact us on our website. So that's all we have today. Thank you so much, Tim and Dan, for the excellent information, the great demo. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your day to attend this broadcast. I hope everyone has an excellent weekend.